Well, hello there! I am Gail Carriger, and this is my live video talking about the craft of writing for NaNoWriMo, and just my normal monthly Q&A for everybody out there. So, yeah, hi! I hope you're having a relatively good November. Well, I hope it's better than good. It's relatively good for me. I very kindly collected some questions ahead of time, or I should say my assistant did, but good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, and good day. There used to be a British, or maybe it was American, host in the 1950s who would start out there broadcasting that way. Yeah, I don't remember anything about it, but hello, let me know where you're, signing in from if you feel like it. I always love knowing how big the world is, I guess. I like being reminded of that. So I am going to go with the 9 questions that I have collected ahead of time that are all going to be about the craft of writing, and then hopefully that'll take us up through about a half an hour, and then you all can ask me questions, hopefully also about the craft of writing, but at that juncture, if you have a burning question that's nothing to do with writing or being a writer or putting words on a page, then you can also ask me then. So let's see how quickly we get through these questions, shall we? All right, here we go. Yeah, so just before I start, I don't talk about the craft of writing very much, or the art of writing, because I feel like it's so different for everybody, and so I'm not sure how much good advice I have to give on it, but it is NaNoWriMo right now, and I know sometimes what another writer can say about writing can I don't know, spearhead you in one direction or another, or at least help you figure out a puzzle that you're getting through. So it's mostly my hope that I can do that today. So here we go. Jules asks, what do you find most challenging in the writing process, and what techniques do you use to overcome writing difficulties or blocks? Okay, so what do I find most challenging in the writing process? Honestly, just convincing myself to sit down and put words on the page is probably the hardest thing for me to do, which is really weird because that's my job. But it is kind of, I guess, the writer equivalent of forcing myself to get up in the morning and go into work, right? So just forcing myself to sit down and type. And I'm always trying new patterns or new techniques to just get myself to type. So for example, today I decided that during NaNoWriMo, on the weekends at least, I'm gonna write first thing in the morning. So I'm gonna get up, make myself a cup of tea, and start writing. And I'm not gonna do anything else except that on Saturdays and Sundays. Just to see if, I know intellectually that I have more willpower and I'm probably gonna be more productive if I work first thing in the morning, but I hate doing it. So I just tricked myself by saying on the weekends you write first thing. So that's kind of a thing I'm trying to convince myself to do. So actually just getting myself to write the rough draft is really the hardest thing for me. I enjoy revising and I enjoy editing and I enjoy all of that side of the writing. So the rough draft is really hardest for me. So what techniques do I use to overcome these difficulties? Well, I gave you an example. Switching up my routine is helpful, but also finding the routine that works for me is really helpful. Normally, I write for about 3 hours in the afternoons, and I generally start around tea time. And that's because sort of the ritual of making myself tea at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or what have you, kind of gets me into mode. So for me, a habit is helpful. A lot of the crutches that I used to use, because we're in lockdown right now, I haven't been able to use. I'm a social writer. I like sitting across the table from another writer and just listening to them type and typing myself. I'm slightly competitive, so it really helps for me to hear other writers typing, because that means I know they're putting words on, so should I, right? So those are some of the things just over the years I've developed. One of the tricks I use for writer's block is reading nonfiction, or in my case, reading secondary or primary sources about the time period I'm interested in. if I'm writing, something historically based. So nonfiction for me is a real creative driver. So I always recommend, if you're writing science fiction, for example, like go read some science articles or go take a look at the NASA website, stuff like that. I think that always like makes me feel more creative when I'm looking at, historical evidence or like current research into different aspects of like sort of the scientific branch of the world. Yeah, so those are some tips. The other thing that always helps me be creative is if I put myself in a situation where I can't write, like taking a shower or something, because I find that's always very inspiring, right? All right, we're gonna take a brief break because it's sitting right here and I don't want to forget, which is, last live I introduced the Gail Talks About a Pastry segment, so I'm gonna talk about a pastry again today. Today's pastry is the Queen Amman. This is a Queen Amman, or at least it's my local bakery's version of a Queen Amman. Queen Amman is spelled rather, in a rather unfriendly way. It's spelled like Coogan almond, two different words, but it's pronounced Queen Amman. A Queen Amman is this sort of squidgy puff pastry. It's a very flaky pastry, almost like a croissant. And then it sometimes will have something in the center of it or whatever, and it's usually a sweet pastry. So it's one of my favorites. I love puff pastry. So yeah, that's our Queen Amman. So when I am done with my live, I get to eat it. Don't worry, I won't eat it in front of you. I would think that slightly rude, I think, on a live. Although I've probably done it before. And I always drink in front of you. Right, second question, moving on. I see everybody signing in, and I'm watching the comments scroll and waving at you, metaphorically speaking, even if I'm not actually, like, saying anything to you. So, yes, please keep commenting. Don't ask questions yet, though, because I'm gonna deal with the questions I already have first. Okay, Lauren asks, what do you wish you'd known when you set out to write your first novel? That is a great question. I wish I had a ready answer. The business answer to that is don't verbally say yes to a publishing deal. That's like one of the biggest pieces of advice. Like, don't say yes, say, let me get my agent. Even if you don't have an agent yet. Or let me pass on that offer. That's very kind of you. Let me talk to my agent. Is probably the only phrase you should say when somebody is offering you any kind of writing related deal, even if you don't have an agent or don't intend to get one. Just pause. Never say yes, never say no without a number and some legal protection. Right. So the writing of the first novel, I think there's two parts of this. And they're contradictory, but like one of the things I kind of wish I'd known starting out, for those of you who this is maybe your first NaNoWriMo or your first attempt at really writing a fiction novel, is that it really helps to try and figure out what your creative habits are, like training for a physical activity, like weightlifting for the first time, or trying to run a marathon or something like that. It helps to try and figure out what patterns work with you creatively and emotionally as a writer. So what time of day you're most productive, at what point in the day you have the most willpower in order to convince yourself that it's a good time to write, how it works with your family or social life, those sorts of things. And so that you can begin, and you don't have to do it right now, but you can begin to think about how you make writing a habit, or how I might make writing a habit. Because like everyone else, or I think like most writers, I started out writing when I had a full-time work. And, I was either working full-time or I was studying full-time and working part-time. And so figuring out the pattern that allowed me to fit being creative and writing within that was kind of part of the learning process. And thinking about it consciously as a new skill set that you're kind of acquiring for yourself, like learning how to throw a pot on the potter's wheel or something. That's part of writing, is not just figuring out how you can be creative, but how it fits into your life, being creative in this way. Because it is a kind of weirdly different form of producing art, writing. So that's one. And then the other lesson that comes from that is realizing that every single project I write is completely different. And every single project is going to mess with me and mess with that system that I've set up in a new and exciting way. So I have all of these coping patterns that I've sort of developed in order to be consistent as a writer, and then every single time I sit down and write a new book, it breaks those patterns in some unpredictable way. So that also is part of being a writer, is then also developing the tool set that allows you to be flexible enough and gracious with your creative muse in such a way that you're like, oh, this one is gonna go pear-shaped in this way. This book, like most of the time, I know I struggle with writing a book at the 1/3 and the 2/3 mark points. I'm always gonna have bog downs there. I'm always gonna start not trusting myself and feeling kind of imposter syndrome-ish, although it's not quite the same. But I'm always going to lose faith in the project at a 1/3 mark and at a 2/3 mark. That's me. That's just how I do it. But then I'll write a book and I lose faith at the half-point mark for some strange reason. And I'll like think about how I'm being creatively, and I'm like, why is this happening right now? Like, it should have happened 6,000 words ago, you know. So every project is different. And so those are the two things that I kind of wish I'd known when I started out. One, that it's important to try and think about it as a habit and develop it as a habit. And two, once you get the habit, you're always going to be breaking it and figuring out new tips and technique, and every project will be different. So, question number 3. I asks, what is the most bonkers story idea that you've ever enjoyed noodling in your brain but never put to paper? That's a really hard question, because until recently I would have said the 5th gender, and then until recently I would have said the one I'm currently working on, which is my like crazy weird project. I tend to keep an idea file. I have a terrible memory. It's very sieve-like. And so what I do is I come up with crazy creative ideas for various stories or short stories or whatever, and then I write them down, and then I forget about them. So I could open that ID file and probably find something totally crazy and outrageous, but I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. So my purple alien with noodly hair that comes from an alien race with 5 different genders is probably what I will pick for the moment. And I wrote it, so yay. So take the crazy idea and run with it. Robin asks, what's the most filling snack to eat while writing? Ooh, well, probably something protein. I hate to say it, but I like recourse to egg white omelets all the time. So I make myself like a little bagel sandwich with an egg white omelet on the top of it, and lots of vegetables like tomato and avocado and stuff. That's my most filling snack. I like carbohydrates, but I have to force myself to eat protein, and so protein is probably better for the brain. Meats would be my guess. Jameson asks, what's the biggest pitfall that is the most difficult to overcome when writing and publishing? The biggest pitfall, I think, for most writers, and probably me too still, is finishing. A lot of us get super excited by the ooh shiny and the sparkly bits of the beginnings of the project. And many pantser writers in particular, or discovery writers, once they know the ending of something, they're kind of done with it and they don't want to finish writing it down. So there's like, whatever kind of writer you are, I feel like all of us kind of get bogged down at some point during the book and just don't want to finish it because we're now bored with that project. We're being distracted by something new or equally shiny, and new project, new creativity. So actually finishing is gonna be the biggest challenge for almost everybody, would be my guess. So yeah, that's the biggest one. And then the second half of the question was publishing. Oh, the biggest hurdle while publishing is actually putting it out in the world, I guess. Whether you go traditional, in which case the hurdles are imposed by other people, or whether you go indie, in which case there are holes in the road for you to fall into. Either way, it's gonna be a challenge to actually put what you have created and risk putting what you have created out in front of other people's eyeballs. So those were the two. Karen asks, do you use a traditional outline, the post-it notes on the wall method, or a synopsis to organize while writing? And in a similar vein, so I'll take this as a one full question. Do you do main character profiles or a list of character traits per character? Okay. So, The answer, Karen, is I use Scrivener, and Scrivener does all of these things in one place, which is one of the reasons I love it. I'm a very visual writer, and by visual I mean I think about the way the words look on the page, the way the words look in sentence structure, the white space versus wordage on pages. I also really like to have images when I'm writing, whether that's a sketch I've done of like the layout of the town that I'm writing in, whether that's like actors or people from magazines or what have you that I'm using for character inspiration. Those kinds of things. Like I really like visual elements, clothing as well. So Scrivener allows you to sort of keep all of that in one place, and so it tends to be what I do. So I tend to outline pretty strictly, but I also I jump around as I write. So I will often. I have what I call the epiphany, which always is what makes me want to start writing a new project. I have lots of ideas for projects, but I don't really start writing it until I have an epiphany. For me, an epiphany is always the main character talking to another character in my head, and I see it like a movie scene. And the moment I see that, I know the main character is living as a voice inside me and that I can write them. So I will write that epiphany scene. For Soulless, the epiphany scene was Alexia and Ivy walking in Hyde Park together, talking about the fact that Alexia killed a vampire the night before. Now, that's not the first scene in the book. I think that's the opening to chapter 2, actually. And my epiphany scenes are usually don't end up being the first scene, but they're usually the first scene that I write. So I'll write that scene, and then I'll start coming up with the outline about the plot and what's going to happen and that sort of stuff. I'll lay that in. I have a shorthand, like number of words I tend to write chapters in, depending on how long the book is ultimately going to be. And I kind of fall into that pretty easily now. And then I'll start writing. Usually about halfway through, I'll actually then come up with what's going to be the beginning scenes. I know that's a weird way to do it, but that's just the way I do it. And usually about halfway or 2/3 of the way through, I'll also come up with the ending scene, and then I'll write that. I like knowing what I'm writing towards. I'm kind of the opposite of a discovery writer. I really like knowing my end game and where I'm going. And so I really like a solid outline, and I also will often jump ahead and write scenes. Also sometimes write snippets of scenes, like I'll wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, I'm gonna have a scene where one of them is really sick. And so I'll like write that tiny scene, or I'll write a little bit of dialogue, or I'll write a sex scene for like one of the San Andreas books. And that is something I'm then writing towards, and then I'll hit it, and I'll incorporate it in the book, and then I'll keep writing. So I am mostly a linear writer, but occasionally I just like go totally off the rails. So my outline ends up being both an outline and these kind of snippets of future moments that I'm writing towards. Yes. So Post-its on the wall, no. I occasionally have done like brain maps, especially when I was writing the spy novels where the plots were a little bit more convoluted. I've drawn out brain maps in order to figure out how everything interconnects with each other. You can look up what a brain map is. And then I've also used colored like 3x5 cards sometimes. Again, that was mostly with the Finishing School series because it was these sort of integrated, complicated plots because they're spy novels. So I have used other techniques, but both of those techniques I used before Scrivener came into my life. So now I mostly use Scrivener because it's so visual and allows you to view layout in various different ways. And that's also where I keep my character profiles. And then, so far as the character profiles are concerned, as soon as I name a character, so if a character is important enough to be named in the book, they get a character profile. And on that profile, I kind of have a long list of things that I note about them, from physical appearance to, say, magical ability, or what if they're a werewolf, what the wolf half of them looks like. Eye color, all that sort of stuff that you need to keep track of for consistency's sake, especially if you're writing in any kind of series or any kind of shared world, which of course I do both of. So I keep track of all of those things. And then eventually those migrate over to my publicly facing Wikia, called the Parasolverse Wikia, which is where I keep track of like all of the major characters in my various universes. And that's updated regularly, and you can update it. Anybody who reads my stuff can go and update it. I crowdsource a lot because there's hundreds and possibly thousands of characters now. It's really hard to keep track of them all. And I'll accidentally name people the same thing, which confuses both me and my readers, because I really like certain names, apparently. How are we doing for time? Ooh, we're still good. I'm gonna get through these final questions. Jessica asks, how do you hold yourself back from sharing all the cool Easter eggs and awesome references? It would kill me to hold on these wicked and amazing secrets. This is really embarrassing, but I've forgotten about them. I put them in when I'm writing, and I'm really excited about it. But even with my indie projects, it's going to be 6 months to a year before those things I'm really excited about, and I feel like, oh, I'm so tricksy and clever, actually see the light of day. So there's no point in me talking about them as I'm writing them, because half the time people don't even know the characters that I'm referring to because they've never been published before. So... And then, by the time the book actually comes out, I've usually completely forgotten the plot by the time the book actually comes out. It's terrible to admit, but I said this before, my brain mostly resembles a colander. It's full of holes. I think that's one of the reasons I'm a writer. It's like, I can't keep it in here, I just have to spit it all out. Otherwise it'll fall out. So I might as well spit it all out and write it down. Since I'm not going to remember it either way. Allie asks, how much does the story change while you're writing? And does it ever come out completely different from what you've planned? It changes a lot, often. Generally, there is a kind of overarching theme or emotional tenor to the book. That doesn't usually change, and that has to do with kind of the archetypes and tropes that I use a lot of and that I rely on regularly. But often, especially the latter half of the book, will change quite a bit, because even if I have a really strict outline, my really strict outline will be like, a character has to come in at this juncture and impart this piece of information. Now, that character can be an old familiar character, like Lord Akaldama, for example, or that can be a completely new character, depending on kind of like how I'm feeling in the scene and the demands of the plot at that juncture. And whether I introduce an old character or a new character will then materially change everything going forward through the rest of the book from that point on. So yes, I have learned, so my outlines are not that strict. They're pretty amorphous to a certain extent, and that means that the flexibility inherent in the way I outline means that how I eventually write the final chapters in particular is going to be very dependent on decisions I've made prior to that. So, yes, so it always comes out differently from what I've planned. Generally speaking, those differences, though, are improvements. It's like I don't have enough imagination to start with at the beginning of the book to conceive of how it could go. And only the act of writing the book actually feeds my imagination enough to make it sufficiently creative to satisfy my own whims. That was really philosophical. I am so sorry. I won't do that again. Dawn asks, with the popularity of audiobooks, do you find yourself making adjustments with book narration in mind? For example, not using character names that could be confused phonetically, or messing around with accents and speech quirks. That is a really good question. So I have always been an audio writer. I was raised on audiobooks. I did not have a television growing up. My parents did not believe that children should be exposed to television, so I didn't have a TV. I was exposed to television. I wasn't like, in the middle of nowhere. I was kind of in the middle of nowhere, but like the neighbor across the street had a TV. I would go watch She-Ra after school. I did have television, but I didn't have one at home. So a lot of what I did for entertainment was read. But also I was a big drawer as a kid. I liked to sketch and draw and color and stuff. And so I would listen to audiobooks. I was raised on audiobooks, basically. I love audio. And so I think of myself as pretty audio already. One of the things I do and have done on almost every book I've written is an audio pass. So one of my revisions is actually reading the whole book out loud to myself in an empty room. I feel like I catch more mistakes that way. But I also feel like it helps with voice and fixing the sing-song nature of prose, and also encouraging the sing-song in certain places. I catch more word repetition that way. That kind of thing. So I feel like I write for audio already. I also like to write to challenge audio, so I use tongue twister sentences because I like to make it difficult on my narrators because I'm evil. I do think about accents and origins more than I used to, partly because of conversations that I've had with my narrators. So because they ask me about things, and it makes me think about and notice the voice and how I describe the voices of my characters differently. That's weird. So I'm not an audiophile. I would not consider myself, I've never been super into music. So I don't really think about the way people speak. And I say this because my best friend is a singer. I have dated opera singers. So, and I went to a school that had a musical conservatory, and a lot of voice majors were friends of mine. So I think about, I realized that I don't think about voice as much as people who are trained, voice singers and stuff do think about it. And it was in my books for a really long time, where I just I would just describe most werewolves as having gravelly voices, or like in the San Andreas books, the whole pack came from Boston. And my narrator, Kurt, was like, I need more distinguishing voice characteristics so that these characters sound differently from each other when I'm reading them. And that did influence me and influence the way I wrote, so that I could put in like cues and tics for my narrators to help them give different characters different voices. So I have thought about it. But no, I'm kind of the opposite in terms of, do I think about character names that could be confused and stuff? I like to intentionally challenge my narrators. I like to throw tongue twisters in there. Different kinds of cadence and stuff, just to there's a blooper reel out in the world for Crudrat. So Crudrat is a science fiction YA book that I wrote that only exists as a full cast audio, and so I had a bunch of narrators for that. Like all the different characters were played by different voice actors. And there's a blooper reel of all of the voice actors cursing me for one reason or another, because I'm always throwing tongue twisters when I write, and they hated it. And that makes me very happy because I am secretly quite evil. So that blooper reel is one of my fun places. All right, and those are all of the prep questions that I had ahead of time, and we are exactly halfway through the live. So now I am ready for questions from everybody who has kindly showed up and is watching. What can I answer for you? What questions do you have about writing and the writing process? We're trying to keep this to that. If you have a burning question about something else, I'll maybe sneak that in, but... Oh, yes, and please put a question mark at the beginning of your question. And here we go. Jameson asks, is it better to write out the entire plot or let the characters drive the story, or a bit of both? Well, the way I do it is I let the character, it's a bit of both for me. But unfortunately, the answer to that question is the way it often is in the creative life, which is whatever works best for you and helps you write consistently and helps you write a lot and helps you finish the project is how you should approach it. So if you are a discovery writer, and most of the discovery writers I know don't like knowing where they're going, because then they don't enjoy it. They like the surprise of discovering as they write. That's one of the reasons they write. So for you, not having an outline, if you're a discovery writer, is probably going to help you write more. On the opposite end of the spectrum are people like me who really need to know where they're going and feel lost and sad and adrift if they don't have purpose in their writing, if they don't have steps that they're going to hit, if they don't have a checklist of things that they are going to cross off, which I love a checklist. So for me, having an outline is what's going to help me write and write consistently and write enough. So yeah, it's a matter of figuring out your own kind of writer spirit, I suppose. Emma is asking an off-topic question, but that's okay, we'll take it. Any recommendations for holiday gifts this year? Or better still, what are some of the best presents I've ever received? I like to give food. I love food. Food is love for me as well. Like food is an offering, receiving food, giving it. Right now, when everybody's trapped inside, I feel like spoiling somebody with something delicious is the way to go. However, that does involve, like, you have to know the person you're giving the gift to really well, their likes and dislikes. So I found a jam company out of Seattle, called the Aikido Family Jam Company, and they do like boutique specialists, specifically plum jams, which I happen to love plum jam, like weird, crazy plums of different varieties and stuff. So I've been gifting their sample packet to people. My friend Nick is Blumond. I can't pronounce it because it's French, but she's a chocolatier. You can find her on Etsy. I recommend her all the time. If you look on my Facebook page, I just recommended her tea chocolate collection, which is outrageously delicious. So she has like sample packs. She has a steampunk sample pack. She has the garden sample pack right now, and she has the tea sample pack right now. She's sold out of the tea, but I love her chocolate. It is, as far as I'm concerned, the best tiny, like the best little specialty chocolates I've ever had in my entire life. She uses incredibly unique flavors, and she uses dark chocolate. I am a dark chocolate girl, and I can't recommend her enough. So that's another thing that I will gift people, is just like a special of her chocolates. And then, like, I like to use places like Etsy, where there are just creatives doing really interesting and fantastic things if I'm going to give an object. But I prefer something that can be consumed. You know, like giving somebody clothing or what have you seems like you're taking too much of a risk of giving something that might eventually end up in a landfill. Although books are the other exception. So I will gift books. I gift a lot of nonfiction books, and then specifically fiction books from authors that I think are getting a lot of support and would really suit the person I'm gifting it to. So my friends have very different reading tastes from me. My mom has a very different reading taste from me. She likes cozy mysteries, for example. But like, I read Book Riot all the time, and I pay attention to like the book community in general. So if there's a book, especially a debut book, or a book from an author of color, or something that I'm just like, oh, that looks right up X person's alley, we'll keep all of those books in a big, you know, file, and then right around now, I'll start ordering them and sending them to people for the holidays and stuff. So yeah, because I feel like books, even if they don't suit the person, people are more likely to pass it along to someone else that they think it would suit. So I feel like a book is a good gift to give because it has a long life of like spreading joy and love to other people. So yeah, so food and books, those are the things I tend to gift. Wendy asks if I ever write in pen instead of typing. No, I'm a typer. I started writing really young, but I started writing on an actual like typewriter. So I've always kind of thought into typing. I feel like my creative brain kind of spills out my fingers like this. Occasionally I will longhand notes to myself. My writing is, anybody who's been in a signing line for me knows this, but my handwriting is really bad, like really bad. So I struggle to read my own handwriting. I come by this genetically. I come from a long line on both sides of the family of people who have inscrutable handwriting. So yeah, so I don't longhand. If you are a writer who writes longhand, the only full-time pro writer who I know who does that is Kristen Kishore, so you should go pay attention to her and her blog. She's a fantastic young adult author, and she writes everything out longhand, and I think she's insane, but she's a very successful career. So Katie asks, do I ever experience loss of creativity due to depression? So I don't suffer from depression. I've lived with people who have. So I'm not the best person to answer this question, I'm afraid, although there are many, many, many writers who do, who have tackled it. I hit up on being uncreative for the first time in 10 years this year, mostly due to the world, the situation in the world right now. And learning that there's a thing that can switch off my ability to write was kind of scary, but I learned that lesson. This is the thing about being a writer or being any kind of creative. You learn things about your creativity as you go along the creativity journey. And learning that even me could be impacted by external situations into not being able to write was a shocker. But there it is. That's one of my 2020 lessons. And I just had to learn to be gracious with that. And that's unfortunately the answer. I think a lot of people suffer from loss of creativity when they are sad, when you are hit by loss or depression, or grief. And a lot of us have been going through different forms of grief right now. And treating, I think, I don't know, because again, I haven't experienced it, but I feel like treating depression like it is a hit like that. Like it is, you have lost something concrete, like losing a person. Losing your creativity is kind of like that. And to be gracious with yourself and learning how to be gracious with yourself and cutting yourself some slack includes being able to say, oh, I can't write right now, and that's okay. And not like abusing yourself for that or punishing yourself for that. And instead just doing the things that do make you feel good. And maybe your creativity will come back to you. If those things are taking a walk in the sun or in the cold or in the rain, taking a bath, eating a quinamon, whatever it is that helps you kind of uplift yourself again. And that's the other thing to kind of like learn about creativity, which again, it took me a long time to learn, is it'll come back. Trust me, it'll come back. It's there. It's waiting for you. It'll come back. It'll be fine. But if you need to take care of yourself and not the muse beast, that's okay too. Take care of yourself, and the muse beast will be lurking in the ether, waiting for you to pluck her again. It'll be all right. It'll come back. Sometimes it just takes longer than other times for it to do that, to come back to you. Valency, excuse me if I did not pronounce that right, asks, how would you suggest taking a classic hero's journey story and transforming it into a heroine's journey? I wrote a book about it. I think if you've already written from start to finish a hero's journey, it's going to be really difficult to turn that into a heroine's journey. And I would also question why you would want to. I mean, hero's journeys are quite popular. It might be worth it to put that out into the world as is. Because like everything changes when your motivation, definitions of strength, archetypes being used, all aspects are different when you're writing the different journeys. And so I think it would be very hard to take one and completely turn it into another. Unless you're like doing it as a thought experiment, like you're taking Gilgamesh and trying to turn him into a heroine or something, which might be interesting, but it sounds like a lot of work to me. Sorry, I don't really have a good answer for that one. Doc asks, oh, do you ever find notebooks with ideas for books that I forgot about, or is that just me? No, I do that, especially when I'm moving house or moving offices. I will suddenly be like, oh God, that was an idea. I've gotten to the point now where I have like a tub of all my old notebooks. I throw stuff away. So I scan stuff, I keep stuff in, and then I throw it away. I don't like to keep objects around me very much. And that includes old notebooks and stuff. So I have like just a few left now, and they fill up like one tiny tub, shoebox size tub. And occasionally I'll go back and kind of look through it. I have a file cabinet of old short stories and stuff too, but very rarely. It's kind of fun though, sort of weirdly nostalgic to look at your previous ideas. Anastasia asks, the 5 best pastries to try from a French bakery. Oh God. Oh, that's such a hard question. I'm going to reject your premise and say what you want to do is try the different forms of pastry that come in multiple different. So you want to try short crust, hot water if they have it. That's often used for savories. Puff pastry and rough puff. And like something along the like croissant, a super buttery flaky pastry. And then sometimes even the French patisseries will have a like a phyllo style pastry these days. So that's like a super crispy pastry. So that is what I do, is I like go into the French pastry and I try like to see which pastry, how they do the different types of pastry, and then I decide what they do best, and then that's what I get from them. Like this this place is actually a donut place, but they happen to do a really good Queen Amman. Our local French pastry, French patisserie, for example, does an incredibly good, like flaky croissant level pastry, but a lot of their other pastries, like their short crust and stuff, are not that good. So I only get the croissant pastry there, and then the rest. And then once you've figured out what their pastry perfection is, then you try the other things that a French patisserie will hopefully have. Like a madeleine is also, like a plain madeleine is always a good judge. Similarly, a cannelle, if they have it, and you should test their choux pastry. How could I forget choux pastry? So that's, choux is a cooked pastry that is used for eclairs, is one of the things Americans would know about. So you should test the choux. And, yeah, like a financier, if they have it, that's an almond-based flour pastry, which is used for various kinds of cakes in French patisseries. And a macaron, I suppose, if they have that. Also an almond-based, but executed differently, mixed with egg whites. Anyway, yeah, I just threw a bunch of things at you. This girl would go, if she had one thing to try from any French patisserie, would always go for a flaky pastry with a custard of some kind in it. I like to test the pastry execution, which is your manipulation of butter and flour, and your custard execution, which is your manipulation of the other two great things in life, cream/milk and egg. So that's why I always like to try those things. But that's because those are my favorite things. Nicole asked a question about the heroine's journey, and I'm just going to check the time. Okay, we still have some time. Can you give us a quick chassis beat rundown of how Soulless fits into this structure, please? Oh, that's a really good question. I never thought about that. So Alexia is isolated at the start, so I've already taken her family away from her and stuck her into an untenable position. But what's really been taken from Alexia is her sense of self and identity. So she doesn't have purpose. So I took away that instead of taking away an actual familial connection. And so through the course of Soulless, the things the pattern beats that she's going on in order to acquire and gather ostensibly are her trying to figure out what's going on with the golem attacking her, but in reality are moments of networking that allows her to connect in. And so you see her with Ivy, and then the course of sort of Ivy's arc is going to be like, why are Alexia and Ivy friends? Like, what is the back and forth of that particular relationship? So that's like this information gathering, rediscovery thing. And then, of course, because it is a romance, Soulless, I'm sorry, it's a romance, for those of you who don't realize, the culminating thing is going to be her and Lord Macon and how they match to each other and how he is going to, and the pack is eventually going to become the surrogate family. So the course of Soulless is that particular narrative of connection. Okay. But yeah, what I'm teasing out what your real question is what is the thing that's taken? The inciting event that causes her descent. And the inciting event happens before the book started. So I kind of cheated that narrative. But you see her descent, right? Like the real moment of clarity in Alexia's journey in Soulless is the moment when she leaves Flute and leaves the house alone as a single female at night in Victorian London, which is like, that is the big withdrawal of identity and sort of the casting off. So she is on this sort of quest to kind of prove the soullessness of her identity. What she has to do is cast off the trappings of what it means to be a proper Victorian young lady and the sort of sheltered / wallflower position that she's been forced into by her blood family. Look at me being all intellectual. Sarah asks, what are my favorite types of scenes to write? Well, I love dialogue. I tend to see my characters very clearly getting into discussions with each other, which is why there is dialogue in almost every moment of intimacy in all of my books. So I can't write a sex scene without dialogue. I can't write a action scene without dialogue. There's dialogue in everything I write. I love dialogue. So yeah, my moments of clarity and epiphany when I know I'm going to be able to start writing something are always dialogue scenes with characters talking to each other. So yeah, those are always my favorite things to write. Yeah. Description is my least favorite thing to write, and humor. Which, I'm a humor author. How did that happen? But yes, I often add description, fight sequences, and funny bits on second passes. Funny bits that don't come up naturally in dialogue. A lot of my characters are kind of naturally funny with each other, so that kind of wit is generated on the first pass. Most all of my other humor, like slapstick and all that sort of thing, are generated in later passes. Rules of three, that stuff. Emma asks, have you read or watched anything good lately? Oh, I'm so glad you asked me this question, because I'm so excited to report that one of my favorite gay paranormal romances out of Thailand is currently available on YouTube. I've been waiting to tell you about this. Go to YouTube. The name of the drama is He's Coming to Me. It is about a boy who falls in love with a ghost, and the ghost falls in love with the boy, and yes, it has a happy ending still, despite the fact that one of them is dead, and it is adorable. It has been really hard to get a hold of for a long time, and I love it. It is captioned, so you have to be comfortable reading captions, unless you speak Thai, of course. But it's really, really cute. It's from GMM TV, so that's the channel you can find it on, and I will tell you all about it I'll make notes for everybody and links and stuff, but He's Coming to Me. It's so sweet. Yeah, so that's my big exciting recommendation. I have already seen it, but yeah, but now everyone else can. We're having one of these Q&As. Oh, everybody stop asking questions now, because I'm gonna have to wrap up with the ones that I already have. Eddie asks, does writing humor come naturally to you, or do I have a humor file available? I do have a blog post on how to write comedy. You can Google my name and writing comedy, and I'm sure I might have more than one. But yeah, because I do think it's a skill that can be learned. But as I said recently, comedic dialogue between my characters comes up pretty naturally. In fact, I kind of can't avoid it. Like, I just wrote a scene for Nano recently, which is meant to be a really, like, dramatic scene, and it went comedically pear-shaped on me because the two characters are talking to each other, and that's just the way they talk. And I was like, oh, that got funny. But no, a comedy doesn't necessarily come easily to me. It is work. I argue, and I will die on this very tiny hill, that comedy is the hardest thing to write. Is really difficult. I wish more people did it. I'm always looking for funny things to read, but it's hard. And it requires multiple revisions for me to get all the different kinds of humor into a book. So, sorry. Chocolate and tea. Eddie asks another question. What's my favorite part of writing? What's my favorite? Oh, because we talked about what was the difficult bit. Revising. I really love revising and editing because the book is done. And all I have to do is fix it and make it pretty. These days I also really like formatting because I found this new program, Vellum, and that's how I format my independent projects in order to put them out into the world. And it's like so smooth and fun to do. Put everything in and make it all neat and pretty and then spit out a book. Very exciting. So those are two of my favorite things. Karen asked a question that I think I already answered, Karen, about depression and writing and that struggle. Eddie asked if I reread past books to write new ones in the universe. Yes, sometimes no. It depends on the gap of time between them. So, like when I was writing the Parasol Protectorate, the Finishing School, and the Custard Protocol, I wrote one book after another book, so I didn't have to reread. But when the time comes for me to write, say, the next Fifth Gender book, I will have to reread that book because it's now been too long for me to remember what I did. But most importantly, the voice. So I'll lose the voice of the character, which is a good thing because I need the voice of a new character in my brain. But it means that I've kind of forgotten the tonality of them and what it's like living inside their minds. So I tend to need to reread in order to get my voice back. And the voice is a hard thing to describe to readers, but it's basically kind of the tonality and sing-song nature of the character's deep POV. And so I need to reread to get that back when I'm going to write another book with the same character. If I'm writing, for example, like the Delightfully Deadly series, which are standalones, I don't need to necessarily reread the previous book in that series because they're pretty independent of each other. So, and I have a very good team of beta readers who I rely on to make sure I'm not making any mistakes in terms of consistency within the universe. So I can depend on them for that. It's really mostly the voice side of the equation that I can't depend on anybody else to make right. And if I mess it up from the get-go, it's going to intrinsically damage the sort of integrity of the entire book. So I have to make sure that that is right. So that's why I have to reread under those particular circumstances. I am scrolling through. Remember that there's no question mark at the beginning of your comment. I don't think it's a question for me, so I just scan over it. So if you asked a question and forgot to put that at the beginning, then please redo that. Eddie asks if my current project has a title yet, and yes it does, but no, I'm not going to tell you, because then somebody puts it onto Goodreads and gets all of the metadata wrong, and then I have to go through this fight to get it all fixed. So that is secretly the reason why I never reveal my titles until I'm really sure on all of the concrete natures of the book, like characters and descriptions and stuff like that. So sorry. And I think it's a very good title because it's unique and therefore searchable. But also I'm very proud of it because it is two uncommon English words, but words that have like double meanings. This always makes me happy. So yeah, although right now I'm not sure if that's the title or the series, because I'm not sure if this book is a series or not, because it's not done yet. And I don't know what's going on with this book. My nano project is crazy. Usually I have much better plans than I'm currently doing, but that's one of the reasons I'm using nano, is to just like, fool around. Somebody says that they need a foodie novel from me, which pretty much all of my books are foodie novels. People are always complaining that my books make them hungry. So this book, which is a far future, all techno-fantasy thing, I still managed to put food in it. There's still a cooking club as part of the university, which my main character is involved in. So there's always food. I love food. It's my true love, actually, now that I think about it. Jameson asks, do you have recommendations for turn of the 18th and 19th century information? I have a blog post for you. It is Google Gail Carriger. I think it is 25 research tips for writing steampunk, or you can just do Gail Carriger researching the Victorian era. All of those searches should yield up this blog post. It is both book recommendations, secondary and primary, and online recommendations of things to research. It is primarily geared to the Victorian era. I'm not as good in Regency or earlier, but it is a good place to start. So Gail Carriger, 25 tips for researching steampunk, I think should probably get that blog post. But I'll also come back and put the link in the description as soon as I'm done. Now I have two things. I better write those two things down. I have to do He's Coming to Me, and what did I just say? Oh, the blog post. 25 tips. Victorian. Now I have to be able to read my own handwriting, which we already talked about is never a good thing. Any last questions? It looks like not. So that's great. We're right near the end of this. So I'm sorry if I missed your question. If you asked it too early, I really, really apologize. But this went really, really well. So maybe I'll do another How the Sausage is Made Q&A. I hope you all are enjoying NaNoWriMo and not feeling too stressed because of it. Remember, it's okay. We're sort of having nano discussions as this group, and it's kind of turned into counseling sessions. And one of the things I feel like a lot of people doing nano need to hear, especially if it's your first time, is that it's really hard. I have been writing for 10 years, and I am finding nano hard this year. Also, you don't have to do exactly what it says. So if you're finding that your natural pace is something more like 200 words a day or 500 words a day, it's okay to make that your goal and to feel happy and satisfied with yourself when you make that goal. I give you permission if you need it from me. But yeah, so be kind to yourself and enjoy it. Enjoy what this process tells you about your own creativity and learning about your own creativity and how you write. And best of luck in making it through the second half of the month. I look forward to eventually maybe reading some of what you all have written. And on that note, I should get back to it. So, goodbye everybody. Have a wonderful rest of November.